watching her move forward in her spirituality, and it's fantastic. How long have we known each other, Julie?
I don't know, 20 years maybe?
20 years or so, yeah. And she has grown so. Have you ever been around somebody and you just watch them move forward and grow and become more who they truly are? And I am so excited about listening to Julie, because I know she's a good speaker, but I haven't heard her for a while. So please welcome Reverend Julie Hawkins. And I'm not gonna hug you just for your own benefit.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Dottie. Thank you for those really kind words. And I have grown and evolved and changed, as hopefully most of us have, right? I think that I'm invited here to speak because that's how they get me to church.
Oh, darn, you realized it.
And that's okay. It is the holiday season, and yes, I do teach people how to say no without guilt and how to say yes to the right things. So I am going to speak a little bit about that today. Several years ago, my sister, actually Chris, my late partner, and I were sitting watching TV, just hanging out, and I got a phone call, and it was my sister. And she said to me, it was probably around September, and she said to me, "Oh, I'd love for you to come for Thanksgiving." And I kind of looked at Chris, and Chris looked at me, and she goes, "And you don't have to do a thing." And I'm like, "All right, we can do that. We'll come. We'll come." And so, you know, the weeks went by, and we didn't really think about it. And one day, getting close to Thanksgiving, we were sitting watching TV again. I guess we like TV. I admit it. And I had gotten up to go take a shower. And when I got out of the shower, Chris said to me, "Your sister just called. And she wants you to bring a honey-baked ham." And I went, "What?" And I went ballistic for about 15 minutes. Every possible thought that I could have about what happened to we don't have to do anything, what happened to just come and you don't bring anything, what happened to you said this and now you're saying this a week before Thanksgiving. Every possible thing that you could imagine came up in that 15 minutes for me. And then I went, how am I going to handle this? And I really thought about it for a while. And just sound effects. And I thought, I really need to think about what I want this outcome to be and how I can convey that in a way that she'll receive it and feel okay about it, and that I can convey it and feel good about it. Because that's really what happens, or what doesn't happen, when we want to say no. Or we say no and then we feel guilty, ugh. Or we say yes and we feel guilty. Pardon me. It's a mixed bag for us. And if you're a people pleaser, like I was my whole life, it gets really challenging. So I was the girl who didn't want the confrontation. I saw the confrontation in my household, and I'm like, well, if I just, go along, then maybe everything will be okay. And so I learned how to go along. Except it didn't always feel good to do that. But the more I did that, the more I did that. Because I didn't know what else to do. And then it moved into different areas of my life. And I thought, well, if I just do what I'm asked to do by the boss, I'll get that reward. And sometimes I did, and sometimes I didn't. So my outcomes, my results were inconsistent. And they didn't always feel like I wanted them to feel. I wanted to feel empowered. I wanted to feel like I had a choice. So back to my sister. So I come out and I'm thinking about what am I going to say to her? And how am I going to do this in a way that I feel good and that she's going to hear me? So I thought about it for a while, and I actually came up with some things. And then I called her back. And we had a conversation, which I'm actually going to tell you about a little bit later. Because it really is important as to how you can say no and feel good about it. But I really wanted to think about how can I do this so I don't beat myself up? How can I do that so that she feels good about it? And what was it that triggered me? That pissed me off so much because I was pissed off. I was pissed off. Have you ever felt that way? That somebody tells you one thing and then, no, it changes, and then now it's something else, and you're like, yeah, we've all kind of gone through that at some point, right? And then what happens? It builds a little resentment tick somewhere in you. You kind of don't forget it. You internalize it. It can be polarizing. It's like, well, if I say yes and I don't want to say yes, then I'm beating myself up. But how do I say no? I'll just give in. I'll just clean up the dishes every night, even though I'm sick of doing that. No pointing, no pointing. You know who you are.
Yeah.
I'll work those 10 hours a day, even though I can't do that anymore. I have kids at home, or I have a loved one at home that I need to take care of. Or hey, I just want to take care of me. Right? What happened to taking care of me? So all of this is about really setting clear boundaries and expectations. And if you're like me, people use those buzzwords, but what do they mean? How do you know when to set a boundary? How do you know what that boundary is? Maybe it's different for you than it is for the person next to you, and likely it may be. Because while there are some general guidelines about boundaries, like especially for us in the United States, you're in my space, don't be in my space. That's not the same in other countries. It's not the same. Japan, it's like, what space? So how do you know what your boundary is? How do you know when somebody stepped over it? Well, you get triggered. You get triggered. And so the first thing you want to think about is, oh, what happened? How did I get triggered? What triggered me? And that's exactly what I did. I thought, wait a minute. She said this, and now she's saying this? A week before? I got triggered about that. That was language that didn't work for me. That was an action that didn't work for me. You know, I can tell you right now that boundaries, if you have a hard time saying no to somebody, or you don't know when to say yes to yourself, that's not a new issue. Okay? You likely grew up with that. And it will continue to be that way until you find the right language. God bless you. And everybody else bless you. Until you find the right language to be able to convey what it is that's really going on. And then, will they be able to hear you? So, the first thing is really, how do you know if it's a boundary issue? Well, you can go to my website and take the is it a boundary issue questionnaire I have on my website. But if you don't do that, there are also little clues. So one day, Chris and I were driving in the car, and I remember I did this a lot, but it was at this particular moment in time that it really, kind of the light bulb went on for me. We were driving down the street, and I looked in my rearview mirror, and I noticed this car was really close to me. And under my breath, I'm like, God, get out of my space, get off of me and get out of my space. And Chris is like, what's wrong with you? That car wasn't really that close. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. I think that person was in my space. I think it was a boundary issue. So the universe has a very interesting way of sending a message to you of things to work on, as I'm sure you know. Sometimes you get the 2x4. That's when we don't work on things for a long time. And they grow, and they grow, and they grow, and they grow. And sometimes they're simple metaphors. And sometimes we can't see them at all, just like the nose on our face without a mirror. So the people around you are that mirror. And they will bring you those challenges. They will bring you those issues. They will bring you that message that you need to hear. And boy, did I need to hear this one. All of my life, I just didn't want to have confrontation, didn't want to disappoint anybody, didn't know how to say no, thought if I just did X, Y, and Z, all would be well. And then one day, Chris and I were teaching a class. And as it always happens, the issue of boundaries came up in the class. Because, hello, boundaries are integral to our life. And she would inevitably turn to me in each class that this came up in, and it came up in every class. Some problem always was a result of a lack of boundaries. And she would say to me, you know, you really need to teach a class on boundaries. And I'd be like, sure, And the truth was, I didn't know how to teach a class on boundaries then. Because I had my own boundary issues. I didn't know how to enforce my own boundaries. How could I teach somebody else how to do that? So I would just go, yeah, I'll do that one day. Sure, I'll do that one day. Thanks. Yep. Even though during class, I would talk a little bit about how to get through that. What's the language you can use for that? Sometimes it's so much easier to tell somebody else what to do than to do it yourself. So I knew that this was a big life challenge issue for me. I'd seen it before. I'd felt it before. When things don't feel good, you gotta ask what's going on, right? What's going on for you? What is it that doesn't feel good about giving into somebody who always wants you to clean up the house, or who falls down on their job and you're just like, I'll just do it myself because it's easier, when it's really not easier. It's really not. But we think it is. So we stay in that pattern. Because we think it's easier than learning the life lesson. And you know what? In some ways it feels like it is, until it catches up with us. And that's what happened to me. As many of you know, my partner died, actually this December will be 6 years. And I have a daughter, and my daughter was still lives in Hawaii. And it's okay. Do what you need to do. My daughter lives in Hawaii, and Chris died this month, December 21st. And my daughter didn't come out during that time. I hadn't seen her. It was a very quick, unexpected, horrific death, truthfully. And then I got news from my daughter that she was coming out in February. Well, frankly, I was a mess. I didn't know which end was up. I didn't know who I was or where I was going. My whole life had been turned upside down. And my daughter was one of those people that, still is one of those people, that is part of my mirror. And so continuously brings me my problems for me to work on, and one of them is boundaries. And so I was really forced with thinking about, well, she's coming out for a visit. How do I take care of me in this time that I can't even tell you what my name was, much less do anything for her? How do I convey that to her? How do I take care of myself? And so it really brought me to a place of, this is the biggest challenge I could ever have in my life about setting boundaries. Losing somebody so close to me, changing my life in so many ways, and how do I now move forward and take care of myself and not give in to the manipulations that a child can, who's an adult, who can perpetrate. They know how to do that. Not just children, partners, bosses. They know how to do that, right? They know how to push our button, whatever that button is. So the learning began. The learning began of where I needed to really embrace what it meant for me to have boundaries in my life. How do I protect myself? How do I take care of myself and be kind and respectful of other people's feelings at the same time? Because if you're like me and no is hard, you go, no, I can't do this anymore. It's kind of this or this. How's that work? Not good. Not good. Because I can guarantee you that when you don't stand up for yourself in a voice that's loving and kind, you end up taking it out on somebody else. Well, nobody wants to do that either. And so the journey began. And for the next 2 years, it literally was all about anything I could read on boundary setting, taking all of my knowledge and skills and training as an NLP trainer, which is all about the language that we use and how we process that internally, and how we then go forward in the world. And taking all of that information and figuring out a process I could use to learn how to say no to somebody in a way that felt good to me and was something that they could hear themselves. And I worked hard at that. And then I was challenged periodically by my daughter and my sister and maybe others along the way. And just when you think, you're like, oh, I think I've got this down, something else happens and brings you a new challenge. And yet, I kept working. I kept at it. Until finally, I felt like I had a simple process that I could use, that I could follow, and that I could teach to others, and began really using that in my own life. It's not rocket science, but it's putting it together in the right way and practicing it. Because just like any new skill, you have to practice it, or it falls by the wayside. It really is of no value to you unless you learn how to work with it and use it to your advantage. Right? So I worked on it. And it was a process. And it still is a process. And I think it will always be that process for me, because that's one of my major life lessons. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I learned how to embrace that. And so getting back to my sister and how I said no to her, I composed myself for about 15 minutes. And then I sat down and I wrote out just a key phrase for myself. Now, mind you, I was on the phone with her, so she couldn't tell that I was reading it. And I really, really encourage you to start simple. So if you don't know how to say no to somebody, don't start at the top. Start at the point of least resistance. This was the easy place for me to start. So I wrote down a key phrase for myself. And then I got real clear about what I was saying no to and who I was saying yes to. And the no wasn't to her per se. The no was to, wait a minute, you went back on your word. Not that I said that to her, because you cannot do that and get what you want, okay? But I needed that internal conversation. And so I was really looking at my values and looking at what was important to me and learning that the trigger for me was somebody had said something to me and made a declaration and then went back on it. And that didn't feel good to me at all. Not to mention it was like, you know, a few days before Thanksgiving. So I'm like, no. So, after my rant for 15 minutes, I got on the phone and I called up my sister. And the funny thing was, I was so prepared that it was 10 minutes before I even got a chance to get a word in edgewise with her. And what I realized was that she was setting herself, her stage up for why I should do what she wanted me to do. Just so you know, that's manipulation. Okay? And it's a subtle form, okay? She gave me all the wonderful reasons why we should have a honey-baked ham. And they were great reasons. And finally I said, you know, I'm okay if we don't have a honey-baked ham. She went, oh. Oh, but really, and it was almost as if she didn't hear me say that no. It wasn't a direct no. It was, I'm okay with that, so I'm not going to go pick it up. And she said, oh, but wouldn't it be great? And you know, that I mean, she kind of kept at it for a while. It would be so delicious, and we'd have these leftovers, and it would be so great to have this, and I know you love a honey-baked ham too. And I said, yeah, I do, but I'm really okay if we don't have one this year, because I made a promise to myself that I was never going to go stand in that line again, because it didn't feel good to me to stand there for 20 minutes in the craziness of what's supposed to be a loving season. And so I wanted to honor myself. And I just kept repeating the phrase, yeah, I'm okay with not having that honey-baked ham. I'm really okay with that. And finally she said to me, oh, well, maybe Chris can go pick it up. And I went, no, Chris has clients. And so she kept at it a little bit more. And I just kept saying, you know, I'm really okay if we don't do that. And finally she said, oh, well, maybe Jess can do it. And I went, oh, maybe. Okay, we'll talk to you later. Okay, honey, thanks, love you, bye-bye. So, I got off the phone and I literally jumped up and down. Because for the first time in my life, I had deliberately and intentionally got the outcome I wanted, stood up for myself, felt empowered, delivered a message that I knew she could receive, and felt so good about it. And nobody was angry. There was no confrontation. There was just respect and hearing of each other. Mind you, here's my caveat for that. If you are somebody who gives in a lot and you try to say no, the first time you do it, whew, it will be like over your head. They won't even hear you. They just won't hear you. So you have to do it again. And then you have to do it again. Because the human brain, it takes about 3 times for it to click in. So don't give up. The other secret to saying no without guilt and feeling good about it is, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you gotta leave your emotions behind. That is what gets you into trouble every single time. It is a trigger, and it goes right to where it hurts. And when you get hit in the heart, it's almost impossible to rebound from that immediately. It's like later you go, oh, I could have said this, and I could have done that, and I should have done that, and why didn't I do that? And then you beat yourself up all over again, and it starts a syndrome all over again. So the first thing to practice is getting aware that when you say yes and you really want to say no. If that's your issue, I promise you it's happening across all segments of your life. Figuring out what it really is, that's the issue at heart and at hand. It's not the honey baked ham, right? It's that I was told something in integrity and then they went back on that. That's my stuff, my issue. That was my thing. Your trigger may be different. Okay? It's also about remembering what is the outcome that you want from this. You certainly don't want that person to be angry with you, because that's why we don't say no in the first place. And you don't want to give in because you want to feel good and empowered about who you are and what you stand for. So when you know those things, then you can take more inspired and empowered action. Where you stand up for yourself in a way that feels good for you and that somebody else can hear. And that means checking your emotions before you respond. And if that means saying to somebody, yeah, I need some time to think about this, then that's what I suggest you do. You don't have to give a yes or no answer when somebody asks you something right away. In fact, I have 7 magic words that I always start my clients with. And they are, I'd like to think about this. Yes, you can count them. They are 7. I'd like to think about that. It's not, let me think about it. It's not about getting permission from them to think about it. You don't need permission to think about it. You have the human right to think about it and to respond with what feels good for you, in a way that feels good for you, and in a way that is respectful for everybody. So does everybody think they can say an empowered yes or no?
Yes.
Come on. Because if you can't, you get to say what?
I'd like to think about it.
I'd like to think about it.
No, I'm going to think about
Yeah.
that.
Yes. And here's the other key thing about that phrase. It's really important. It delivers consideration to somebody and respect. You're not saying maybe. You're really saying, I'd like to give this some time and consideration to think about it. I think it deserves that. So go forward and remember your phrase, especially during the holidays. I'd like to think about that.